The curse of the Brasilia pilot plan. Brasilia, the meticulously planned capital of Brazil, is a city like no other. With its futuristic architecture and grand avenues, it was the vision of President Juscelino Kubitschek and the famed architect Oscar Niemeyer. But beneath its pristine surface, there lies a dark and terrifying secret, a legend that has haunted the city since its very inception. The story begins during the construction of Brasilia in the late 1950s. The city was a monumental project, a bold attempt to move the capital from the coast to the heart of the country. The stakes were high, and the pressure on the architects and engineers was immense. The deadlines were tight, and the government was eager to see the city rise from the red dust of the Cerrado. As the story goes, a group of engineers, desperate to ensure the success of the project, sought out a local shaman known for his connection to the spirits of the land. The shaman warned them that the land where Brasilia was to be built was sacred, and that disturbing it would bring dire consequences. But the engineers, driven by their ambition and the promise of wealth, made a dark pact with the shaman. They offered a human sacrifice in exchange for the success of their city, a ritual that would bind the spirits to protect the city and ensure its prosperity. The victim they chose was an unsuspecting worker, a man who had come from the Northeast in search of a better life. He was lured to a remote part of the construction site late at night, where he was ambushed by the engineers. As he realized what was happening, he struggled desperately, but the men overpowered him, binding his hands and feet. They dragged him to a deep pit, dug at the very center of the city's planned layout, and buried him alive, his screams muffled by the earth that covered him. For years, Brasilia flourished. The city became a symbol of modernity and progress, its sleek buildings and wide boulevards admired by the world. But soon, strange occurrences began to plague the city. People reported hearing faint cries and moans late at night, as if coming from beneath the ground. Construction workers claimed to see shadowy figures at the edges of their vision, figures that would disappear the moment they turned to look. The locals began to whisper about the curse of the Brasilia pilot plan. The legend took a more sinister turn when a series of inexplicable tragedies struck the city. Several high-ranking officials involved in the city's planning met with untimely deaths, car accidents, sudden illnesses, and mysterious disappearances. The people of Brasilia started to believe that the spirit of the buried worker was taking his revenge, his restless soul haunting the city that had been built on his grave. The curse became a topic of hushed conversations, a secret shared among the city's residents. Those who had the misfortune of encountering the ghost described him as a gaunt, pale figure with hollow eyes, his mouth open in a silent scream. He would appear suddenly, in the dead of night, wandering the empty streets of Brasilia, his presence accompanied by an overwhelming sense of dread. The unlucky few who locked eyes with him claimed to be struck by intense paranoia and fear, a terror so deep that it drove some to madness. Over time, a legend grew that anyone who stepped on the exact spot where the worker had been buried was cursed. This spot, hidden somewhere in the city's vast layout, was said to bring misfortune to those who stumbled upon it. The stories varied. Some said the cursed would suffer from nightmares and hallucinations, while others believed that their lives would slowly unravel, plagued by accidents, illness, and despair. To this day, the legend of the Brasilia pilot plan persists. Even as the city thrives, the shadow of its dark origin lingers, a reminder that not all is as it seems beneath the surface of progress. The ghost of the buried worker remains a specter of the past, his restless spirit forever bound to the city that was built on his suffering. Those who live in Brasilia know to be wary, especially at night, when the streets are empty and the silence is broken only by the distant, echoing cries of a man who was betrayed and buried alive in the name of ambition. The headless mule of the Sertão, deep in the arid expanses of the Brazilian Sertão, where the land is as harsh as the life it sustains, a tale of terror has been passed down through generations. It is a story of love, betrayal, and a curse so terrible that it has left its mark on the very landscape. This is the legend of the headless mule, a creature born of sin and driven by vengeance. The story begins in a small, remote village, where a young woman lived in piety and simplicity. She was known for her beauty, and many young men sought her hand in marriage, but her heart belonged to a man she could never publicly love, a local priest. Their affair was passionate but hidden, conducted in the shadows and secrecy of the confessional. The woman, blinded by her love, believed that they could keep their secret forever, that the eyes of the villagers would never see through their facade. But as with all secrets, theirs was eventually exposed. One night, a villager witnessed the priest slipping into the woman's home under the cover of darkness. Scandalized, he spread the news throughout the village, and soon the whole community knew of the sinful affair. The villagers were outraged, not only at the betrayal of their trust, but at the sacrilege committed by the priest. They demanded justice, and their anger quickly turned into a thirst for vengeance. They confronted the woman, accusing her of corrupting the priest and bringing shame upon the village. Despite her pleas and protests, the villagers decided to take matters into their own hands. They sought out a local witch, a woman known for her knowledge of curses and dark magic, and asked her to punish the woman for her sins. The witch obliged, casting a curse so horrific that it would be spoken of in hushed tones for generations. She cursed the woman to transform into a headless mule, a creature of fire and fury that would roam the Sertão by night, forever tormented by her sins. As the curse took hold, the woman's body convulsed and twisted, her head vanishing into thin air, replaced by a column of fire that spewed from her neck. Her hands and feet became hooves, her skin turned to rough hide, and she was consumed by an uncontrollable rage. The headless mule, as she became known, began her nightly rampage, galloping through the darkened fields and along the deserted roads of the Sertão. Her hooves struck sparks from the rocky ground, her fiery mane illuminating the night like a beacon of doom. Her tortured whinny echoed through the hills, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of those who heard it. The villagers soon learned that the curse had not only transformed the woman but had also bound her to the land, making her the guardian of the Sertão. Those who wandered the region after dark were at risk of encountering the headless mule, and the consequences were dire. Anyone who heard her approach was advised to drop to the ground and cover their faces, for to gaze upon her fiery form was to invite death. The mule was relentless, driven by a rage that could never be quelled, and she hunted those who dared to test the boundaries of her cursed domain. Over the years, the legend of the headless mule spread far beyond the village. Travelers passing through the Sertão heard the stories and added their own experiences to the lore. Some spoke of seeing the mule from a distance, a fiery apparition that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Others told of close encounters, where they felt the searing heat of her flames and heard the thunderous sound of her hooves as she charged past them. A few even claimed to have been pursued by the mule, narrowly escaping with their lives as she chased them through the darkness. The fear of the headless mule became so ingrained in the culture of the Sertão that even today, locals refuse to venture out at night. The mule is believed to still roam the land, her curse as potent as ever, her rage undiminished by the passage of time. She is a symbol of the dangers of forbidden love, of the price that must be paid for breaking the sacred bonds of trust and morality. For those who live in the Sertão, the legend of the headless mule is more than just a story. It is a warning, a reminder that the past is never truly buried, and that the sins of one generation can haunt the next. The mule's fiery form continues to burn in the minds of those who hear her tale, a terrifying reminder that some curses can never be lifted, and some spirits can never find peace. The Phantom of the Opera House Manaus, the heart of the Amazon, is a city of contrasts, where the raw, untamed jungle meets the refined elegance of European-inspired architecture. At the center of this dichotomy stands the Teatro Amazonas, a grand opera house that has been the pride of the city since its inauguration in 1896. But behind its opulent facade and gilded interiors lies a tale of tragedy and terror, a legend that has cast a long shadow over the theater for more than a century. The story begins on a warm, humid night in the late 19th century as the city prepared for the opening night of its magnificent new opera house. The Teatro Amazonas was a symbol of the rubber boom, a period of immense wealth and prosperity for the region, and the opening performance was to be a grand affair, attended by the city's elite. The star of the evening was to be a young soprano, a local woman who had risen to fame for her extraordinary voice. She was the pride of Manaus, a symbol of the city's cultural aspirations, and her performance was eagerly anticipated by all. But as the night approached, the young soprano grew increasingly anxious. She had been receiving strange, anonymous letters warning her not to perform. The letters were filled with cryptic messages and veiled threats, but the soprano dismissed them as the work of a jealous rival. She focused on her preparations, determined to give the performance of her life. On the eve of the opening, tragedy struck. The soprano was found dead in her dressing room, her throat slit by an unknown assailant. The sight was gruesome. Her once beautiful voice silenced forever. Her lifeless body slumped on the floor in a pool of blood. The news of her death spread quickly, casting a pall over the city. The opening night was canceled, and the Teatro Amazonas was closed indefinitely. The investigation into her murder yielded no results. There were no witnesses, no suspects, and no clear motive. The letters, now considered key evidence, led to dead ends. The case was eventually closed, but the mystery of her death remained unsolved. The first reports came from the theater's staff. Janitors working late at night claimed to hear faint singing echoing through the empty corridors, a haunting melody that sent chills down their spines. Some saw fleeting glimpses of a ghostly figure dressed in white, her face pale and bloodless, wandering the darkened hallways. The sightings became more frequent, and soon the ghost of the soprano became a permanent resident of the Teatro Amazonas. The theater reopened years later, but the legend of the phantom had taken root. Performers and patrons alike began to experience strange occurrences during rehearsals and performances. Stage lights would flicker and dim without explanation, props would move on their own, and the sound of a woman's voice could be heard humming softly in the background, even when no one was on stage. Some performers reported feeling an icy presence beside them, as if someone, or something, was watching them from the shadows. The most terrifying encounters occurred during live performances. On several occasions, audience members claimed to see a spectral figure on stage, standing among the actors, her eyes fixed on the audience. She would appear for only a moment before vanishing into thin air, leaving those who saw her shaken and pale. The most famous incident happened during a performance of Verdi's La Traviata. As the lead soprano sang the final aria, the ghost appeared beside her, visible to only a few in the audience. The singer, unaware of the apparition, continued her performance, but those who saw the ghost swore they heard a second voice, blending with the soprano's, a voice that was eerily similar to that of the murdered singer. The legend of the Phantom of the Opera House grew, attracting the attention of paranormal investigators and curious tourists. Some came in search of proof of the ghost's existence, others to experience the thrill of encountering the supernatural. The ghost herself became a symbol of the theater, a tragic figure who never got to finish her final performance, her spirit bound to the place where her life was brutally cut short. To this day, the Teatro Amazonas is a place where the past and present coexist, where the beauty of the opera is intertwined with the terror of its haunted history.